The story opens with a shattering contradiction. A ruthless mafia boss believes he has chosen a perfect angel to cherish his ailing mother, while a deadly conspiracy, set within the imposing manor, where power hangs in the air like gunpowder and old money. The intro reveals David Moore, a predator in the underworld but a guardian at home. The estate's heavy curtains filter pale, afternoon light across antique furniture that has witnessed generations of bloodshed and loyalty. Persian rugs muffle footsteps in rooms that reek of leather-bound books and calculated violence. As David prepares to leave for yet another territorial negotiation that could turn his streets red, he entrusts his most precious possession, his mother Rosemary, to the care of Teeja, a woman whose grace and refinement seem heaven-sent. Rosemary sits in her favorite chair by the window, her silver hair catching the light, her once sharp eyes now clouded by the fog of dementia that has slowly consumed her brilliant mind. Teeja moves through the manor in flowing cream silk, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant twist, her movements measured and refined like a dancer who knows every eye is watching. She pours tea with the precision of a woman raised in country clubs and charity galas, her soft voice a constant murmur of comfort to the confused elderly woman who can barely remember her own name anymore. David watches this scene with satisfaction before heading to his black SUV, believing his fortress impenetrable and his mother safe from the monsters that prowl beyond his gates. He has killed men for far less than a disrespectful glance. Surely no evil could breach the sanctuary where Rosemary spends her final days in peace. But as his vehicle rolls down the long driveway, David realizes his phone, the device that controls his empire, still sits on his study desk. He turns back, parking quietly and entering through the terrace door, moving through his own home like a shadow. What he witnesses next shatters every assumption he has built about the woman he planned to marry. Through the partially open door, he sees Teeja standing over his mother, her angelic facade replaced by something cold and mechanical. In her manicured hand, barely visible in the muted light, is a small glass vial. And as Rosemary sits helpless and trusting in her chair, Teeja uncaps it and tilts 3 precise drops into the delicate china teacup, stirring slowly, deliberately, before offering it with a smile that never reaches her calculating eyes. David's hand instinctively moves to the gun beneath his tailored jacket, but something stops him. A predator's instinct that tells him this crime is bigger than one woman and one vial. So instead of ending her life in that moment, he chooses something far more terrifying. To watch, to wait, and to discover exactly how deep the betrayal runs before he unleashes the violence she has invited into his home. The real horror isn't just the poison. It's the realization that the woman he welcomed into his bed and into his mother's heart may have turned his sanctuary into a tomb, and she might not be working alone. Poisons every cup of tea served inside his protected walls. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how. Chapter 1. The Mask of Grace. The morning ritual had become sacred in the Moore household. Every day at precisely 10 o'clock, Teeja would prepare Rosemary's tea service with the kind of meticulous care that had first captured David's attention 6 months ago. She moved through the sunlit parlor like a vision of domestic perfection, arranging delicate porcelain cups on a silver tray that had served 3 generations of Moore matriarchs. "There we are, Rosemary," Teeja cooed, her voice honeyed and patient as she settled into the chair across from the elderly woman. "Your favorite blend. Earl Grey with just a touch of honey, exactly how you like it." Rosemary's clouded eyes brightened momentarily, a ghost of recognition flickering across her weathered face. "You're such a dear," she murmured, her trembling hands reaching for the cup. "My David chose well. So kind, so very kind." David stood in the doorway of his study, observing the scene with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally found someone worthy of protecting his most precious treasure. Teeja had appeared in his life like an answered prayer, elegant, educated, patient beyond measure with his mother's declining mind. She came from old money, the Sterling family of Connecticut, people who understood power and discretion. She never flinched at the reality of his business, never asked questions she shouldn't, and most importantly, she treated Rosemary with a tenderness that melted the ice around his carefully guarded heart. "You spoil her," David said, his voice carrying the rough warmth that only appeared when he spoke of his mother. Teeja turned, and her smile was radiant, genuine to every observer who didn't know to look for the microscopic tension at the corners of her mouth. "She deserves to be spoiled. Rosemary has lived an extraordinary life. The stories she tells me." She trailed off, her hand resting gently on the old woman's arm. "She's a treasure, David. I'm honored to care for her." The words were perfect. Everything about Teeja was perfect. Her posture, her devotion, the way she read to Rosemary from classic novels in the afternoons, the way she personally prepared every meal to accommodate the dietary restrictions that came with age and medication. Even the household staff adored her, grateful for her gentle corrections and thoughtful gestures. David crossed the room and pressed a kiss to his mother's forehead. Rosemary patted his cheek with a confused smile, calling him by his father's name, and he felt the familiar ache of watching her slip further away each day. But at least she was comfortable. At least she was loved. "I have to head out," he told Teeja, straightening his tie. Negotiations with the Castellano family could take most of the afternoon. Of course. Teeja rose gracefully, smoothing her cream silk dress. "Rosemary and I will be just fine. We're going to finish our tea, then perhaps work on that puzzle you brought her last week." David nodded, studying the peaceful scene one last time before heading toward the door. His mother sipping tea by the window, his fiancée attending to her with infinite patience. This was the sanctuary he had built from blood and violence, the one pure thing in his corrupted empire. He had no idea he was looking at a carefully constructed lie. Chapter 2: The Forgotten Device. The black SUV had barely cleared the estate gates when David cursed under his breath. His phone, the encrypted device that connected him to every lieutenant, every operation, every thread of his sprawling criminal network, was still sitting on his study desk. In his world, being unreachable even for an hour could mean the difference between maintaining control and watching his territory burn. He swung the vehicle around without hesitation, calling his driver on the backup phone. "Tell Castellano I'll be 15 minutes late." Something came up. The manor loomed ahead, its stone facade imposing even in daylight. David parked in the circular drive, but didn't announce his return. Years of surviving in the underworld had taught him to move quietly, to observe before making his presence known. He entered through the side terrace door, the one that opened directly into the corridor adjacent to the sunlit parlor where he'd left his mother. That's when he heard it. Teeja's voice, but stripped of all its cultured sweetness. Cold, clinical, contemptuous. "Drink up, you addled old fool. That's it. Every last drop." David froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. He positioned himself in the shadows of the corridor, where the heavy velvet curtains created a pocket of darkness. From this angle, he could see directly into the parlor through the partially open door. What he witnessed made his blood turn to ice. Teeja stood over Rosemary with a posture he'd never seen before, rigid, impatient, her elegant features twisted into something predatory. In her hand was a small glass vial, no larger than her thumb, its contents catching the afternoon light like liquid amber. She uncapped it with practiced efficiency, tilting it over the delicate teacup his mother had just emptied. 3 drops. Precise. Measured. She stirred the tea slowly, her movements mechanical, then refilled the cup from the silver pot. "Here we are, Rosemary," she said, and the voice was back, that sugary, patient tone that had fooled everyone. "Another cup? You must be thirsty, darling." His mother, confused and trusting, reached for the cup with trembling hands. David's finger tightened on his weapon, every instinct screaming at him to put a bullet through Teeja's skull right there, to end the threat before his mother swallowed another poisoned drop. He had killed for less. He had destroyed entire families for disrespecting the Moor name. But something held him back, a predator's calculation that overrode even his rage. If Teeja was poisoning his mother, she wasn't working alone. Women like her, from families like the Sterlings, didn't get their hands dirty without powerful motivation. This was bigger than one treacherous fiancé. This was a conspiracy that had infiltrated his home, his bed, his most protected sanctuary. And David Moore didn't just kill conspirators. He uprooted them entirely, burned away every trace, made examples that echoed through the underworld for generations. So instead of pulling the trigger, he watched. He memorized every detail. The vial's size, the way she hid it in the pocket of her silk dress, the false tenderness in her voice as she coaxed his mother to drink. Rosemary took a sip, then another, smiling vaguely at the woman who was slowly killing her. Teeja glanced toward the doorway, and David melted deeper into the shadows, his breathing controlled, his rage compressed into something cold and deadly. She saw nothing. Satisfied, she settled back into her chair, picking up the book they'd been reading, some Jane Austen novel, and continued in that perfect, cultured voice as if she hadn't just administered another dose of poison. David watched for 5 more minutes, his jaw locked, his mind already calculating. Then he moved with the silence that had kept him alive in a business where hesitation meant death. He slipped back through the terrace door, circled to the front entrance, and let himself in loudly this time, calling out, letting his footsteps echo on the marble foyer. "Forgot my damn phone," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the manor. When he entered the parlor this time, the scene had transformed. Teeja was all grace and warmth again, looking up from her book with a welcoming smile. Rosemary dozed in her chair, the teacup empty on the table beside her. "That was quick," Teeja said, rising to greet him. "Everything all right?" David forced a smile, though it felt like his face might crack from the effort. "Just careless. Can't run an empire without this thing." He held up the phone he'd just retrieved from his study. He watched Teeja carefully. Her hands were in her lap now, that cream silk pocket perfectly smooth. No sign of the vial. No trace of guilt in her eyes, just concern, affection, the mask she wore so perfectly. "Drive safe," she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "We'll see you tonight." David nodded, then walked over to his mother. He knelt beside her chair, taking her fragile hand in his. Rosemary stirred, smiling at him with confused recognition. "My beautiful boy," she whispered. "I love you, Ma," he said quietly. Then, still holding her hand, he looked directly at Teeja. "Take good care of her. She's everything to me." "Always," Teeja replied, and the lie was so smooth it could have been truth. David left again, but this time, everything had changed. The sanctuary was compromised. The angel was a demon. And the man who had built an empire on blood and loyalty now faced a threat far more personal than any rival family. His mother was being murdered in her own home, one poisoned cup at a time. And the woman he'd planned to marry was holding the vial. Chapter 3: The Silent Predator. David didn't go to the meeting with Castellano. He made a call, postponed it, and spent the afternoon doing what he did best, hunting. But this hunt required a different kind of skill. No guns, no confrontations, no public displays of power. This required patience, observation, the ability to pretend everything was normal while his entire world had tilted on its axis. He stationed himself in the East Wing study, a room with a direct sight line into the parlor through a series of deliberately placed mirrors installed generations ago by a paranoid ancestor. From here, he could see without being seen, watch without alerting his prey. For an hour, Teeja maintained the performance. She read to Rosemary, helped her with the puzzle, spoke in those gentle tones that had convinced him she was a saint. But when Rosemary's eyes began to droop, when the old woman's head nodded forward in medicated sleep, the mask slipped again. Teeja stood abruptly, her movements sharp and irritated. She paced to the window, pulling out her phone and typing rapidly, her elegant features twisted with contempt. Then she turned back to Rosemary, and David heard her speak, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "Pathetic old bat. Can't even hold a conversation anymore. Why couldn't you have just died quietly?" David's grip on the armrest of his chair tightened until the leather creaked. Teeja checked her phone again, then walked over to where Rosemary slept. She stood there for a long moment, studying the elderly woman with the clinical detachment of someone assessing an obstacle rather than a human being. "You're taking too long," she muttered. "The digitalis should have worked by now. Maybe I need to increase the dosage." Every muscle in David's body screamed at him to move, to cross that distance and make her suffer in ways that would make hardened criminals weep. But he remained still, forcing himself to think like the strategist who had survived 2 decades in the bloodiest underworld territories. Digitalis. He knew the name, a heart medication that in the wrong doses could mimic a natural heart attack. Untraceable, if administered carefully. The perfect murder weapon for someone trying to look innocent. His mother wasn't just deteriorating from dementia. She was being systematically poisoned. Teeja's phone buzzed, and she answered it immediately, her voice dropping even lower. David strained to hear. I know. But the old bitch has the constitution of a horse. No, David suspects nothing. He's completely blind. The inheritance will transfer to him, and once we're married, half of it becomes mine. Then we just... Yes. Exactly. A tragic accident. Everyone will believe it. Stop worrying. I've been playing this role perfectly. He trusts me completely. She laughed, and it was nothing like the warm, genuine sound she made in David's presence. This was cold, calculating, victorious. I'll call you tonight after he's asleep. Yes. I love you too. David's jaw clenched. There was someone else. A partner. A lover. The betrayal was complete. Teeja hung up and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Not her usual phone, David noted, but a second device. A burner. She glanced at Rosemary once more, then left the parlor, her heels clicking away down the marble corridor. David sat in the darkness of his study, his mind racing through possibilities, connections, threats. Teeja Sterling wasn't working alone. Someone was directing her, someone who wanted the more fortune badly enough to orchestrate this kind of long-term deception. His phone buzzed, the secure line. He answered without taking his eyes off the mirror. "Boss, everything all right?" It was Marcus, his head of security, his most trusted lieutenant. "You missed the Castellano meeting. Something came up. I need you to do something for me, Marcus." Quietly. "Name it." "Run a complete background check on Teeja Sterling. Everything. Where she goes, who she talks to, any communications we can intercept. And I want to know about any burner phones registered in her vicinity." There was a pause. "Boss, that's your fiancée. I know exactly who she is. That's why it needs to be quiet." "Understood. I'll have preliminary results by tonight." David ended the call and rose from his chair. He crossed to where Rosemary still slept in the parlor, her breathing shallow but steady. He knelt beside her, taking her frail hand in his. "I'm sorry, Ma," he whispered. "I brought a viper into our home. But I promise you, I'm going to cut off every head of this snake. You just hold on a little longer." Rosemary stirred, her eyes opening briefly. For just a moment they were clear, truly clear, and she looked at her son with the sharpness he remembered from his childhood. "David," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Be careful. That girl, something's wrong with that girl." Then the fog returned, and she drifted back into confusion, but those words confirmed what he'd suspected. On some level, even through the poison and the dementia, his mother had known. The predator in him was fully awake now. The Mafia boss who had built an empire on calculated violence and absolute loyalty was about to unleash something biblical on the people who had dared to violate his sanctuary. But first, he needed to know exactly how deep the conspiracy ran. And that meant playing the role of the blind fool a little while longer. Chapter 4. The Cold Interaction. That evening, David returned home with flowers and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He found Teeja in the dining room, overseeing the staff as they prepared dinner, every inch the devoted fiancée and future mistress of the manor. "David." She brightened immediately, crossing to him with genuine-seeming warmth. "You're home. How did the meeting go?" "Castellano and I came to an understanding. The lie came easily. Nothing to worry about." He handed her the flowers, expensive roses from the boutique florist she loved, and watched her face light up with calculated delight. "They're beautiful. You spoil me. You deserve it. For everything you do for my mother." Something flickered in her eyes. Was it guilt? Satisfaction? He couldn't tell, and that bothered him more than the murder plot itself. How had he missed this? How had someone this deceptive slipped past every defense he'd built? "Speaking of Rosemary," Teeja said, arranging the flowers in a crystal vase. "She had a wonderful day. We finished 2 chapters of Pride and Prejudice, and she was quite lucid during tea. I think the routine is really helping her." The routine. The poisoning schedule. David nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Where is she now?" "Resting in her room. I gave her the evening medication about an hour ago. She should sleep peacefully through the night. More medication. More opportunities to poison her." "Good." David stepped closer, and Teeja tilted her face up for a kiss. He obliged, hating himself for the performance, feeling her smile against his lips like she'd already won. When he pulled back, he let his hand trail down her arm, catching her hand. "You've been using your phone a lot today. Everything all right?" The question was casual, but he felt her stiffen almost imperceptibly. "Oh, just coordinating with the event planner for the charity gala next month. So many details." She squeezed his hand. "Nothing for you to worry about. I never worry when you're handling things." The lie sat between them like poison in a teacup. They ate dinner together, and Teeja was performance perfection, attentive, engaging, laughing at his stories, sharing gossip from her social circle. She asked about his business in the vague, respectful way she always did, never prying too deep, never forcing him to lie more than necessary. After dinner, David excused himself to his study, claiming paperwork demanded his attention. Teeja kissed him good night and retired to her own suite. They maintained separate bedrooms until the wedding, a traditionalist touch that had seemed charming months ago. Now David recognized it for what it was: freedom of movement, privacy for secret phone calls. He waited until he heard her door close, then activated the security system he'd had Marcus install that afternoon while Teeja was occupied. Cameras in the corridors, audio in her suite, GPS tracking on both her phones. The one she knew about and the burner Marcus had already located. Then he pulled up the preliminary background check Marcus had sent. What he found made his blood run cold. Teeja Sterling was exactly who she claimed to be: Connecticut old money, impeccable education, society connections. But 6 months ago, her family had suffered a catastrophic financial reversal. Bad investments, fraud charges against her father, properties seized. The Sterlings were broke, surviving on fumes and reputation. 3 weeks before Teeja had coincidentally met David at that charity auction, she'd been in contact with Vincent Russo, underboss for the Marchetti family, David's primary rival in the territorial wars that had been escalating for years. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about money. This was a calculated strike against the Moore Empire. Marry into the family, eliminate the matriarch, secure a claim to the inheritance, and probably gather intelligence for the Marchettis in the process. Teeja was a weapon, and he'd welcomed her into his home like a gift from heaven. His secure phone buzzed. "Marcus, I found something else, boss." Teeja's burner phone has been in regular contact with a number registered to someone in your organization. David's hand tightened on the phone. "Who?" There was a heavy pause. "I think you need to see this in person. Tomorrow. Early. And Marcus? Not a word to anyone. I don't know how deep this goes yet." "Understood, boss." David ended the call and sat in the darkness of his study, staring at the security feed that showed Teeja's suite. She was on the burner phone now, laughing at something the person on the other end said, her hair down, her defenses dropped because she believed she was safe. She believed David Moore was still blind. That was her fatal mistake. The wolf had seen the viper. Now he just needed to identify every nest before he burned them all to ash. Chapter 5: The Secret Interrogation. The next morning, David rose before dawn and went directly to his mother's room. Rosemary was sleeping fitfully, her breathing shallow, her skin pale in the pre-dawn light. He studied her medication bottles, noted the labels, photographed everything. Then he carefully collected the teacup from her bedside table, the one from yesterday's afternoon tea, and sealed it in a plastic bag. Evidence. He met Marcus in a secure location outside the estate, an abandoned warehouse David owned through 3 shell companies, the kind of place where questions got answered and bodies disappeared. Marcus handed him a folder, his expression grim. "You're not going to like this, boss." David opened it and felt the foundation of his trust shatter completely. The burner phone records showed regular contact with a number belonging to Anthony Greco, David's head of security, his right hand for the past 8 years, the man he'd trusted with his life and his mother's safety. "Anthony," David said quietly, the name tasting like poison. "There's more." Financial records show payments from an offshore account linked to the Marchetti family. $50,000 a month for the past 6 months, deposited into an account in the Caymans under Greco's mother's name. Betrayal upon betrayal upon betrayal. David stared at the evidence, his mind cataloging every security breach, every piece of information Anthony would have had access to, every vulnerability he'd created by allowing this viper into his inner circle. Where is he now? Still at the estate. In the security office. And Teeja. Having breakfast with your mother in the sunroom. Poisoning her in the morning light. David's jaw clenched. "I need you to do something for me." Quietly. "I want samples of everything Teeja serves my mother analyzed. Food, tea, water, medications. Everything. Send it to Dr. Patterson, the one who handled the Castellano autopsy. Tell him it's priority 1 and to keep his mouth shut. Consider it done. And Anthony?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "What do you want me to do with him?" "Nothing. Yet. I need to know exactly what he's told them, what they're planning. Can you monitor his communications without him knowing?" "Already done. He's been sloppy lately." "Confident. Good. Let him stay confident. Let them all think they're winning." David handed Marcus the sealed teacup. "Add this to the analysis. I want to know exactly what she's putting in my mother's tea." As he drove back to the estate, David's mind was already assembling the trap. In his world, vengeance wasn't just about blood. It was about sending a message so clear, so devastating, that it echoed through every territory, every family, every criminal who might even think about betraying the Moore name. But this had to be perfect. One wrong move and they'd scatter like roaches, disappear into safe houses in foreign countries where his reach was limited. No, he needed them all in one place. He needed them confident, unsuspecting, congratulating themselves on their brilliant scheme. And then he needed to destroy them so completely that their names would become a cautionary tale. When he entered the estate, he found exactly what Marcus had described. Teeja and Rosemary in the sunroom, morning light streaming through the windows, a fresh pot of tea on the table between them. "Good morning," he said, and both women looked up. Rosemary smiled vaguely. Teeja's smile was radiant, perfect, the mask firmly in place. "You're up early," she said. "Come have breakfast with us." David crossed to his mother first, pressing a kiss to her forehead. She felt frielier than yesterday, and rage burned in his chest like acid. But his voice remained gentle. "How are you feeling, Ma?" "Tired," she admitted. "But Teeja's taking such good care of me." "I can see that." He met Teeja's gaze over his mother's silver hair. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. I've been thinking about how much you've sacrificed to care for my mother. How much time and energy you've devoted." Teeja's expression softened. "David, it's not a sacrifice. I love Rosemary. I know, and I want to honor that." He sat down across from them, accepting the cup of coffee Teeja poured for him. From a different pot than the tea, he noted. "I'm planning a dinner. Next Friday. Something special. A celebration of your devotion, of our upcoming marriage, of family. I want to invite your parents, my closest associates, make it a real event." He watched her carefully, saw the flicker of calculation behind her eyes before the pleased surprise took over. "David, that's wonderful. Are you sure? I know how busy you are. Family comes first. Always." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Besides, I want everyone to see what I already know, that I'm the luckiest man in the world to have found you." Teeja's smile was brilliant, and if he didn't know better, he might have believed the tears that gathered in her eyes. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me plan it. I want everything perfect." "Of course. Oh, David, this is going to be beautiful." "Beautiful." "Yes. A beautiful execution." As Teeja began excitedly discussing menu options and guest lists, David sipped his coffee and watched his mother doze in her chair, the morning sun casting her in gold and shadow. 1 week. That's all the time he needed to confirm the analysis, to gather every conspirator in one place, to prepare the reckoning. 7 more days of pretending to be blind. 7 more days of letting them believe they'd won. And then David Moore would remind everyone why his name was whispered with fear in every dark corner of the underworld. The dinner party was set. The trap was laid. Now he just had to wait for the vipers to gather before he burned the nest to ash. Chapter 6. The Maid's Testimony. David found Maria, one of the oldest housekeepers, in the laundry room 2 days later. She'd been with the family since before his father's death, and her loyalty was as certain as sunrise. But when he asked to speak with her privately, genuine fear crossed her weathered face. "Mr. Moore, I should have said something sooner." Those words confirmed what he'd already begun to suspect. The staff had noticed things but been too afraid to speak up. They sat in his study, the door locked, the room swept for devices. Maria's hands twisted in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Mrs. Rosemary, sir. She's not herself. I know about the dementia, Maria." "No, sir." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's just it. She's only confused after Miss Teeja serves her. Other times, when I bring her breakfast before Miss Teeja wakes up, Mrs. Rosemary is sharp as ever. We've talked about the old days, about your father, about the business. She remembers everything." David's blood ran cold. "How long have you noticed this?" 3 months, maybe longer. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I started paying attention. Every time Miss Teeja brings that special tea blend, Mrs. Rosemary gets worse. Confused, trembling, can't remember her own name. But by morning, before the next dose, she's herself again. "Why didn't you come to me?" Maria's voice broke. "I tried, sir. 2 months ago, I asked to speak with you privately. But Miss Teeja said you were too busy, that she'd pass along any concerns. I mentioned Mrs. Rosemary's patterns and..." She swallowed hard. "The next day, I found a dead rat on my bed with a note. Careful what you say about family." David's hands curled into fists. "Who else knows? The younger staff suspect something, but they're too afraid to talk. Miss Teeja has made it clear that disloyalty to her is disloyalty to you. Anyone who questions her care of Mrs. Rosemary gets let go. 3 maids in 4 months, sir. You're safe now, David promised, his voice deadly calm. And Maria? When this is over, I'll make sure everyone knows you tried to protect my mother. After Maria left, David sat in the darkness of his study, processing the depth of the conspiracy. Teeja hadn't just infiltrated his home. She'd created a climate of fear that silenced anyone who might expose her. She'd weaponized his own reputation, using the staff's terror of crossing the boss to ensure their silence. It was brilliant, ruthless, and it was about to get her killed. Chapter 7. The Lab Results. The private laboratory David used for sensitive matters returned results within 72 hours. The technician, a gray-haired man who'd analyzed everything from cocaine purity to blood spatter patterns for the Moore family, looked genuinely disturbed as he handed over the report. Mr. Moore, I've seen a lot in 20 years, but this is... He shook his head. It's digitalis. Foxglove derivative. Extremely sophisticated dosing. Explain it to me like I'm planning to use it, David said coldly. The technician cleared his throat. Digitalis affects the heart. In therapeutic doses, it's actually used to treat heart conditions. But in the doses present in this T sample, it would cause irregular heartbeat, confusion, fatigue, hallucinations. Over time, it mimics dementia perfectly. Eventually, it causes heart failure that looks completely natural, especially in an elderly patient. How long would it take? At this dosage? 3 to 6 months of regular administration. Whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing. The amount is calibrated to degrade cognitive function without triggering immediate medical intervention. It's actually brilliant from a purely technical standpoint. David's voice could have frozen fire. How would someone get their hands on pharmaceutical-grade digitalis? Hospital connections, maybe. Or someone with access to specialized botanical suppliers. This isn't something you order online. That confirmed another piece of the puzzle. Teeja or her accomplices had resources beyond simple criminal access. This required medical knowledge, pharmaceutical connections, and the patience to execute a months-long murder. One more question, David said. If someone stopped administering the drug, would the victim recover? Mostly yes. The confusion and hallucinations would clear within days once the toxin left their system. Permanent damage depends on how long they've been exposed, but cognitive function typically returns. David took the report, his mind already working through the implications. His mother wasn't dying of dementia. She was being systematically poisoned to appear that way, setting up a perfect cover for her eventual murder. And when Rosemary died of an apparent heart attack, Teeja would play the grieving daughter-in-law, consoling David while inheriting a fortune and access to everything the Moore family controlled. Except David knew the truth now, and he was going to make sure everyone else did too. Chapter 8. Setting the Trap. David announced the dinner party during breakfast 3 days later, his tone casual but cheerful. I've been thinking, he said, cutting into his eggs with apparent contentment. We should celebrate. Teeja looked up from her grapefruit, her expression perfectly curious. Celebrate what, darling? You. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. 6 months of you taking such devoted care of my mother. I don't say it enough, but you've been a blessing to this family. I want to honor that properly. For a microsecond, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she smiled, radiant and humble. David, that's not necessary. I do it out of love. I insist. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture intimate and possessive. A formal dinner. Your parents, my inner circle, everyone who matters. We'll toast to your dedication and to our future together. Ma's been doing so much better lately. I think she'd enjoy seeing everyone. That last part was calculated. Since Marcus had quietly switched Teeja's digitalis supply with colored water 3 days ago, Rosemary had indeed been recovering. The confusion was lifting, her memories sharpening, her strength returning. The change was so dramatic that Teeja had to have noticed. How wonderful, Teeja said, her smile tight. When were you thinking? Saturday. I've already had Mrs. Chun begin preparations. He stood, kissing her forehead. Wear that emerald dress I bought you. I want everyone to see how lucky I am. After he left the room, David allowed himself a cold smile. Teeja would be scrambling now, trying to understand why her poison had stopped working, trying to decide if she should flee or brazen it out. She'd contact James Westbrook, and whoever her Castellano handler was looking for guidance. And Marcus's surveillance team would record every word. The trap was set. Now he just needed to wait for Saturday. Chapter 9. The Poisoned Toast. Saturday arrived wrapped in the kind of elegant violence that only old money could afford. The Moore Manor's grand dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the long mahogany table set with china that had survived 3 generations of blood feuds. Teeja had outdone herself with the arrangements, playing the gracious hostess with an actress's precision. Her parents sat near one end, old society money, the kind who pretended not to know where their son-in-law's fortune came from. James Westbrook was positioned strategically near the center, his role as head of security giving him legitimate reason to attend. David's most trusted lieutenants filled the remaining seats, men who'd killed for him and would die for him. And at the head of the table, looking more alert than she had in months, sat Rosemary. Her eyes tracked the room with growing clarity, recognition dawning as the drugs finally left her system. "You look beautiful, Ma," David said, helping her into her seat. To everyone watching, it was a son's devotion. Only he saw the way her hand gripped his, the silent question in her eyes. He squeezed back gently. "Trust me." Dinner proceeded with practiced elegance. Servers moved like ghosts, delivering course after course of exquisite cuisine. Conversation flowed around wine and lies, everyone playing their roles in a theater of manners that concealed daggers. Finally, as dessert was cleared, David stood. His presence commanded silence. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying the authority that made hardened criminals flinch. "We're here to honor someone very special. Teeja has been a light in this house during a dark time. She's cared for my mother with the devotion of a saint." Teeja's smile was luminous, her eyes bright with what anyone else would mistake for joy. But David saw the tension in her shoulders, the calculation behind her gaze. "So I thought it appropriate," he continued, "that we share a toast. And since Teeja has always been so particular about my mother's tea, making sure it's prepared just right." He nodded to Mrs. Chun, who appeared with a silver tray bearing a single cup of tea and a familiar small vial. "I thought she should serve one last cup herself." The room temperature seemed to drop. Teeja's face paled, but her smile never faltered. "David, darling, I don't. I insist." His voice was steel-wrapped in silk. "In fact, I'm so grateful for your care that I want you to drink it yourself. Think of it as communion, sharing in the same devotion you've given my mother." James Westbrook shifted in his seat. David's lieutenants, sensing blood in the water, went very still. "I'm not thirsty," Teeja said lightly. "Perhaps. Drink it." The command was absolute. "Or I'll tell everyone what's really in that vial." Silence crashed over the table like a wave. Teeja's parents looked confused. James's hand drifted toward his weapon. Rosemary's eyes widened with sudden, terrible understanding. "You're being ridiculous," Teeja tried, her voice losing its honeyed edge. "I don't know what you're." David pulled out his phone and pressed play. Teeja's voice filled the room, crystal clear from the recording Marcus had captured 2 days ago. "The old woman should have been dead by now. I've tripled the dose, but somehow she's getting stronger instead of weaker. Something's wrong." Then a male voice, James Westbrook. "Moore must have figured it out. We need to move up the timeline." Teeja's voice again. "Fine. We'll stage the heart attack at the dinner party. Everyone will be there to witness her sudden decline. Castellano says he wants proof she's gone before he pays the second half." The recording ended. Teeja sat frozen, her perfect mask finally shattered. "So drink up," David said softly, setting the teacup in front of her. "Or I can have Marcus explain to your parents how you've been systematically poisoning my mother for 6 months while fucking my head of security and selling information to my enemies." Chapter 10. The Wolf's Justice. What happened next occurred with the brutal efficiency that had made David more legendary in the underworld. James Westbrook made the fatal mistake of drawing his weapon. He'd barely cleared the holster before 2 of David's lieutenants put 3 bullets in his chest. The silenced gunshots were soft pops, almost polite, as the traitor collapsed onto the imported rug. Teeja's parents screamed. Her mother tried to rise, but a gentle hand on her shoulder from Marcus kept her seated. "You might want to stay very still," he advised quietly. David never looked away from Teeja. "I'm going to give you one chance to tell me everything. Who else is involved? What information did you sell? Where are the Castellanos planning to hit next?" "Go to hell," she spat, her angelic facade completely gone now. "You think you're so smart. The Castellanos have everything they need to." "The Castellanos have nothing," David interrupted. Every piece of information you fed them through James was false. Every security protocol you thought you stole was manufactured specifically for you to find. You've been playing your part in my operation for 3 months, and you didn't even know it. The color drained from Teeja's face as the truth hit her. She'd been the one being played. Once I confirmed your treachery, David continued, his voice conversational now, almost pleasant, I made sure every piece of intelligence you accessed was poison. The Castellanos are probably moving on warehouse locations that don't exist, planning hits based on schedules I invented. By tomorrow morning, they'll realize they've been set up, and they'll know exactly who gave them the bad information. They'll kill me, Teeja whispered. Probably. But that's not my problem anymore. David gestured to Marcus. Put her in the car. The Castellanos can have her. Consider it a peace offering, proof that I value their pride more than revenge. As Marcus hauled Teeja from her chair, she fought like a trapped animal, screaming obscenities and threats. David watched impassively until she was dragged from the room, her parents following under guard. They'd be released after signing documents that ensured their silence and the transfer of certain Vanderpool family assets as restitution. Then David turned to his mother. Rosemary sat in her chair, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were clear, clearer than they'd been in months. David. He knelt beside her, taking her frail hands in his. I'm sorry, Ma. I should have seen it sooner. I let her into our home, into our family. I trusted a monster. You saved me, Rosemary said, her voice steady despite the tears. My brilliant boy. You saved me. I almost got you killed. The weight of that truth crushed down on him. I was so focused on business, on maintaining power, that I didn't see the war being waged in my own home. But you did see it. Eventually. She cupped his face with trembling hands. Your father used to say that the most dangerous blindness isn't failing to see the enemy. It's refusing to look when the evidence is right in front of you. You looked, David. You saw. And you protected what matters. Later that night, after the bodies were removed and the manor returned to its usual quiet, David stood in his study with a glass of whiskey and the weight of everything that had almost been lost. Marcus entered without knocking, as was his privilege. The Castellanos confirmed receipt of our gift. They weren't pleased. Teeja lasted about 3 hours before she gave up everyone involved in the conspiracy. And 12 people total. Half are already dead, courtesy of the Castellanos cleaning up loose ends. The rest will be by morning. David nodded slowly. Make sure Maria and the other staff who tried to protect my mother receive bonuses. Substantial ones. And find the 3 maids Teeja fired. I want them rehired with back pay and a personal apology. Already done. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 men who'd seen too much death to be shocked by it anymore. What did we learn from this? Marcus finally asked. David considered the question, thinking of his mother's clear eyes, of the poison that had almost stolen her away, of the perfect mask Teeja had worn for 6 months. That the greatest threats don't announce themselves. They pour you tea and smile while you die. And that there's no such thing as a sanctuary. Not in this life. Every wall can be breached. Every trust can be betrayed. He finished his whiskey, the burn familiar and grounding. But that doesn't mean we stop protecting what we love. It means we watch harder, trust slower, and when we catch the serpents in our garden, we make examples of them, Marcus finished. Exactly. David looked out the window at the manor grounds, at the walls and gates that had failed to protect his mother from the real danger, the one he'd invited inside himself. He'd been arrogant, believing his reputation and his violence were enough to keep his family safe. He'd learned otherwise at a cost that still made his chest tight. But Rosemary was alive. The traitors were purged. And David Moore was done making assumptions about angels in silk robes. From now on, everyone would be suspect until they proved otherwise. Even the ones who poured the tea. The next morning, Rosemary sat by her window with actual tea, checked, tested, and cleared by David himself. She was reading a book she'd forgotten she loved, her mind sharp and clear for the first time in months. David watched from the doorway, a silent guardian who'd learned that the deadliest battles weren't always fought with guns. Sometimes they were fought with teacups and patience. And sometimes, the only thing standing between survival and destruction was a forgotten phone and the willingness to see the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Thank you so much for watching the Mafia boss's final phone call. Seeing David Moore finally uncover the truth behind Teeja's perfect mask was a moment we won't soon forget. Arrogance is a dangerous game, especially when you're playing it under a mafia boss's roof. What did you think of David's revenge? Did Teeja get what she deserved, or was David too cold? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of betrayal and justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a chapter of the More Family Saga.